Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. Welcome to the Crispy Talk Show. My name is Marcy, as you already know. I am the founder of Lisanga Vibes, and tonight we're going to have a very interesting conversation. So please relax, sit back, get your drink, get your food, whatever you want, and stay with us because this is going to be a very, very interesting discussion. I will not take that long to introduce what I do, who we are, but nevertheless, I have some good news for you. This is the last show of the year, first of all. And then next month, we are going to celebrate the third anniversary of Lisanga Vibes in Paris. And you are, of course, invited if you can come to Paris with us. So those are pictures from our archive. This was last year in London. That was amazing. And I want to have a better picture than this in Paris. So guys, whatever, you feel like sharing with me and the rest of the team this year, we need that energy. So you will have seen, for those of us who are in our newsletter, that we've shared information in this respect earlier last week. And we will continue doing so officially on all our social media pages from tomorrow. There will be early bird tickets, so, don't take too long to book your tickets. Anyway, that's all for me. That's all for Lisanga Vibes. If you want to know more, you should just go on our social media pages and website. Tonight, the discussion will be mental health, and I wanted to close the year with this discussion because it's been a very, very hot topic over the last 2 years, especially in the context of lockdown, and also with everything that happened to celebrities as well as nobodies or anonymous people. I find that it is the right time for the talk show to have this conversation. It's been a 2-year journey now, and I am very, very excited to have 3 experts tonight to talk to us about the situation in our community and how we can all work together to make things much, much better. So without further ado, I will introduce my panel, amazing panel. I don't have a real audience with me, so I have to do my own drum roll. But I am going to add my panel right now, remove this presentation, and welcome them all. If you guys are ready in the background, I can see smiles. That's great. First one I will add is a wonderful lady who's gracing us with her presence tonight. Khanya, are you ready? You're ready. Welcome, Khanya. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I am fine. So Khanya is joining us from South Africa, but I won't give you that much introduction about who she is until I welcome the other guests, and then they'll all be able to tell you who they are and what they do. Second one on our list tonight is London-based, and we used to be in book club together, I think. That's how we were connected. And I'm very, very happy to welcome Steve on the stage. Welcome.
Hi, how are you? How are you doing?
I am very fine. Very, very nice to see you. And thank you for being here. Like for Khanya, before you tell us everything about the wonderful things that you do, I'll welcome our last guest for tonight, and then we'll be able to kick off. Idriss, are you ready? Welcome, Idriss. Welcome.
Thank you.
Nice to
Thank
see
you so
you.
much.
Nice to have you online. You are also London-based, and
Yes.
before we actually go back into our presentation roll call, I'll add back the presentation so that it's easier for people to see your pretty faces when you're posing, rather than we are all at home chilling. And I will start with Khanya, and can you just tell us who you are, what you do? Like I said earlier, tonight we're talking about mental health, and our first expert for tonight is Khanya. Khanya, welcome.
Thank you, Marcy, and thank you for having me. I'm really excited to engage in tonight's topic. So like you've said, my name is Khanya Frans, and I'm originally from South Africa. I'm a professional occupational therapist, and I'm currently practicing in a psychiatric hospital. I've been working predominantly for this year with a lot of Black people who are coming and accessing some of our psychiatric services. And I also have a podcast where it's called The Adventures of OT, where I unpack our health services within our South African context, and I obviously speak to people abroad, and we do a sort of comparison of what's happening there and what's happening in South Africa, and where we can grow as South African health professionals.
Amazing. Thank you for this very comprehensive presentation. I will go to our second expert for tonight. Steve, tell us what you do, who you are.
Hi, well, I'm Steve. I'm a cognitive behavioural therapist. So I'm a CBT therapist. I also practice a therapy called EMDR, which is really good for trauma. As a consequence, I work a lot with people who have experiences of trauma and depression, anxiety, and stress. So I suppose kind of as a consequence of that and experiences over the past few years, particularly I think with lockdown and especially since the incidents with George Floyd, I think I've been really quite busy, and ultimately I work in the centre of London, but I work remotely, so I work with people across the world, to be honest, just doing work with anxiety, depression and trauma.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for also this very comprehensive presentation. I will now move to our last guest for tonight. Idriss, are you ready? You have
Yes, I am.
they've
Thank
set
you.
the bar quite high, so
Hi.
we are
Yes. So my
listening
name
to
is
you.
awesome. My name is Idriss. I'm primarily an event and training manager at both of these organizations. So at Doing Now, I'm an event and training manager, and at BiPP, the BiPP Network, I am a director of events and logistics. And my remit is essentially to facilitate and organize events that these two organizations put together. My background in terms of in connection with mental health is I've worked primarily as a mental health care assistant in psychiatric hospital before I went to do my bachelor in medical science and starting my master in psychology. So having worked both from a clinical and organizational perspective, and also being very involved in community gathering, I have a invested interest in the mental well-being of the Black community. So that's sort of my interest in mental health.
Amazing. So I guess we are now ready to go back to the presentation. No, I can now remove it for a little while so that we've got more space.
Yeah.
Let me choose a better layout for everyone. There we go. That is a much better. So as you've seen tonight, we are very, very lucky to have an amazing panel to discuss about mental health. So just maybe as a quick introduction about what mental health is, can you just maybe one of you just summarize what falls under the umbrella of mental health? That's an easy one.
Not so.
Yeah.
Not so.
Purely because of the general misunderstanding that people have of the word mental health. My personal definition of mental health is to do with your mental well-being. So how do you? Because health, nobody associate a negative connotation to physical health. When they say that you either have good physical health or bad physical health.
Right.
However, when you mention mental health, it's automatically kind of understood to be bad. So
Right.
yeah, the understanding is that how is your mental well-being? How do you feel? How do you experience the world? And if it's in a healthy manner, then you have great mental health. If it's
Right.
not so, then you may have mental health challenges, and that's something that you can address when that's the case.
Okay, well, I like this. We're already like taking like a different height on this definition, because I went very literal, very, by the book definition. So I'll let the other experts give us their input on this first question before I tell you what I have found from my research. Who's ready to go? Ready?
I'm not sure I've got much to add. I think that was a really comprehensive explanation, Idriss, to be honest, because I think health is always on a spectrum of being well or not so well, and ultimately mental health is no different. So for me, mental health is about the extent to which we engage in a sense of well-being in the world, in terms of how we think about ourselves
Right.
and the world, our environment, how we engage with our environment,
Right.
and our emotions. And it's just on a scale ultimately from being positive and proactive and healthy, we might say, versus being, I suppose, less engaged with the world or negative in terms of how we're thinking, all the things that we're doing.
Right. No, I like that. Those are, very, I find them like very, I would, when I listen to you, I feel like, why didn't I read this more when I did my research? Because when I started doing my research, maybe before I share my research, I'll let Khanya maybe add something to these two amazing definitions that we've already had.
Like you're saying, they're very great definitions, and I think it also speaks to whose definition of health overall, which is, without excluding your physical and mental health. And I think it's also about how do we then determine that you have good mental health, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to unpack that after you've given us all of the research you've done.
Well, in my research, which wasn't that very exciting, but I found that everything that is classified under the umbrella of mental health involve things that may be, I would say, more common, such as depression or anxiety, but also things such as bipolar, schizophrenia, psychosis, as well as, what else did I find that was falling under? Stress as well. That falls under the umbrella of anything that could, potentially lead or express a mental disorder. And I was just absolutely surprised to see how far it can go because, someone who's just stressed, quote unquote, versus someone who's actually bipolar or, who has schizophrenia. I found that was such an extreme that I didn't necessarily connect the two before starting looking into this topic. And even when I was reading one of the books that I have next to me, that was also one of the things that I had not necessarily considered. And what I've liked about what you all said is how it's about feeling well. And it may sound simple, but me looking into that, I don't know why I was expecting to have very complex definitions and concepts, explained to me to just clarify what it is. But in the end, it's about feeling well. Yeah. And feeling well or unwell is very specific to each individual. That's why there's so many potential elements and sources that can influence that. And just to clarify where that imbalance can come from can be difficult. That's why we've got so many professionals like yourselves who have to do that on a daily basis on different aspects to ensure that we are serviced correctly by our healthcare system. Because at the end of the day, that's a health issue. So thank you very much for giving us this brilliant definition of what mental health is according to yourselves. And maybe the first question I would have is that one of the amazing figures that I found was that 1 in 8 individuals in the world suffers from a mental disorder. And I was like, this is wild. Like 1 in 8. This is not even 1 in 10, 1 in 8. So I thought that was absolutely incredible. And one of the other things that I've also found in my research was how within the social media era, the numbers have tended to really rise a lot in terms of new depression, anxiety, disorders that have been highlighted or seen in studies and in different areas of the world as well. So because we've had like a very, very intense 2-year period all at home, not being able to interact with one another as we would usually do, maybe that would be my first question to you. What have you seen as like main changes in your practices or in your day-to-day activities as a result of not having been able to interact normally for such a long period?
So I'll go first with this one.
Thank you very much.
During COVID-19, I was still completing my study, so I was in my final year of study. So there was a lot of staying indoors, and I noticed that a lot of people started speaking about their mental health. So I want to say it became more woke about what mental health is and what depression is, and people weren't necessarily using the words or the terminology just loosely anymore. they presented with a better understanding of what depression actually is, what anxiety actually is. And I think what I found after COVID, or we're still in COVID, but I've also found that a lot of people are starting to present with a lot of social anxiety now, because we've stayed indoors for so long. We're having to go out and go back to work is becoming the challenge. And with us in South Africa, I've seen that a lot of the corporate companies have implemented mental health programs for their employees, where they're really focusing on the employees' mental health. And I've also found that even in the mining sector that I've been slightly exposed to, that they also are focusing on making sure that their employees' mental health is also sound in order for them to, engage in their occupation of work as far as possible. So yeah, I think I've just seen a lot of people become more anxious to go to the braais or the parties and gatherings since COVID.
Amazing. Anyone else wants to add in to this first response? Okay, Mr. Steve's ready.
That's great. I think I've seen the same, to be honest. I think particularly during lockdown in the UK, there was quite a lot of isolation, as we all experienced here, not being able to use our social networks, and again, the things that we use to kind of stay well, connecting with people, meeting, going out, activities, a lot of these things, we either couldn't really do them or we had to do them in a very, very different way. So I think particularly during lockdown, there was a lot of sadness, there was a lot of low mood, stress, and mismanagement of our time and environment. I think particularly for people adjusting their work schedules or adjusting their family situations and working from home, there was a lot of sadness. There's a lot of difficulties with adjustment. And similarly, I think as we've kind of started to move out of lockdowns and moving back into whatever we're calling this new normal or something like that, I think we've got a lot more anxiety coming up, and it is these social anxieties of who am I now, what's my identity now, but also how can I interact with other people. And of course there was also a large anxiety about COVID itself and actually what's safe and what's not safe in terms of social interactions, but quite a lot of anxiety. I think generally speaking there was a lot of sadness and low mood initially because there was a lot of loss, and I think there still is. And we're thinking about loss, we're thinking about mood, sadness, and these kind of stress responses. And now we've just been told to get on with it. So there's a lot more anxiety around, I think.
Yeah.
And it's not that easy to just get on with stuff because a lot of stuff has changed, really. So I'm seeing a lot of people with stress and anxiety presentations, but I'm obviously that's what I'm doing. To be honest, though, if I can keep talking, there was a lot going on. I think, and I might have my timing slightly off, but I think with the first lockdown, there was the time when there was a lot of stuff happening in the Black diaspora.
Yes.
It was George Floyd and it was like permission given, I think, at that point, to recognize actually, I can experience trauma if it's not even me being attacked or being assaulted. And there was a lot of people who took this as a step to actually reflect back on their own experiences of trauma and racism and distress and misgivings. And so actually what I think I found was in the past couple of years particularly, I've had a lot more people coming to explore difficulties of being a person in their body, and that's been in lots of different groups, but I think particularly it's been in the Black communities. It's brought a lot of trauma just by existing, basically.
Interesting. Idriss, what did you see on your side?
So when lockdown started, when the pandemic started, I was working in a hospital, and I saw the devastation of the pandemic, essentially of COVID-19 firsthand. Because at the time I've been a frontline worker the whole of the pandemic, but then I was like literally like frontline in hospitals. Then when I left that and I started working in the school, I saw like the second line of devastation, which was the home life of students and the home life of parents and the teachers as well, having to sort of do their jobs from home. So
Right.
that was another kind of perspective on how the pandemic affected people, and
Right.
especially people from ethnic minority. And I think my observation was that a lot of people, similar to what Stephen mentioned, like they were very isolated and they were very sad, and a lot of people were, because some people didn't have anything to do. A lot of people were left to ponder on their thoughts and to reflect a lot about their experiences, their life, their day to day, their purpose, and what do they, yeah, like that sense of why am I here? Essentially, a lot of people went through that phase of questioning everything
Yes.
about themselves and about the world. And in the back end of that, the level of depression heightened a lot because people realized that they probably were not living the life that they wanted to live or that they aspire to live, and that causes obviously severe depression and that sense of dissociation with yourself, like that. Okay, what's my purpose essentially? So you found a lot of people who did one of two things. They either further isolated themselves by not seeking the support network or finding the support network that will help other people come out of that, or they became more intentional about finding the right network, finding the right friends, the people who were not just there because it was socially acceptable to be together, or the people who would distract themselves with the parties and the outings and really genuinely building connection, which
Right.
at that point you had no other way of connecting with people unless it was a genuine way, you know. So since the lockdown situations has kind of opened up a little bit more, I found people being a lot more intentional about their actions, you know, whether it's where do they go, where do they invest their money, how do they spend their time. I've seen a lot of people pursue their passion, pursue their hobbies. You know, I've seen a lot of people being more intentional about their friendship, checking in on each other and be like, okay, you know, if I really care about you, I will try and make more time for you. Because one thing that we also saw was how expendable we were to the corporate or to the work life. Essentially, that whole sense of working to live or living to work essentially was no longer was basically, we were reminded that okay, that's not real. You know, all of this can shut down and the world will still continue in some way, shape, or form. Like, and not everything would die just because you stop working. So a lot of people had to reflect on that and be like, okay, I need to prioritize my health and my well-being and my family, because if I drop today, they're going to post, you know, a job recruitment tomorrow. But if I leave, my family are going to be the one crying, you know.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people had that chance of shifting their perspective of the world.
Thank you so much
And I
for
think just to add to what Idris is saying, that with the intentionality, there was also a lot of grief that came with COVID. And it's not just with the loss of people, but people lost their jobs, some lost their homes, some lost their companies, and people are
Mm.
still, trying to recover from that grief
Yeah,
in 2022.
yeah, definitely, definitely.
Thank you
That did
so
happen as
much.
well.
And thank you so much for, that's such a great transition. Did you know my next question?
Yeah.
This panel. Okay, my next question is actually to talk about a grief and in particular about Black trauma within that time frame. I know that Steve's already touched slightly on one of the major things that happened to all of us back in 2020, which was unfortunately the murder of George Floyd, captured live and just went viral. But I think the main difference compared to any other death that unfortunately we know of in the same circumstances was the fact that we all had to sit down and at home and we had to take it in. We couldn't just go out to just relieve our stress, our grief, our any questioning, like you said, about our identity, etc. What we would usually be able to do around dinner, around partying over the weekend, going to sports, etc. At that specific time, we couldn't do it because all the facilities were closed, and we just had to face it. And it was at home, it was everywhere. And even if you did not want to be exposed to the images, the name was there and all of the protests that followed after. Basically, we couldn't escape what happened, at that time in June 2020. So I just wanted to have your thoughts on what you have seen that as maybe like a Black professional, first question, and then second, just as what you have seen in the community from your Black patients or counterparties, how they have maybe reacted or not to that specific events in your daily interactions. How was it like? Like, did you have microaggressions such as colleagues who wanted you to share your thoughts on what happened? Or did you have the opposite, like maybe side discussions with your Black colleagues to say, well, this happened again, what are we going to do with that? Or maybe did you have new people that came to your practice after the event because they wanted to have someone to speak to about how they felt? So yeah, I just want to have your thoughts about what happened after the George Floyd murder.
Yeah.
Ready?
Fantastic. I mean, it was really hard, I think. That's an understatement, to be honest. It was an incredibly difficult time. At the time, I was still working in the NHS and privately, which I think is a different dynamic in both teams ultimately. So in the NHS, I was ultimately a minority in being a Black therapist, but there were other Black therapists there. I think I took a big chance, to be honest. I think firstly, it was like, oh my gosh, by the way, we're Black now. So rather than just being a therapist that happens to be Black, you suddenly became a Black therapist. But and this was overnight. And what I decided to do was to open it up. I think it was necessary to explain to everybody that this was really significant. And what I did at the time was open up some safe spaces for discussions for Black therapists to put this on the agenda and to talk about their feelings about it. And then following that, to feedback and to widen up these conversations with the wider team that were not Black, so they could understand these issues as well. But it was, ultimately it was really successful. I think it was naming something. It was putting on the agenda, which it hadn't been before that. Ultimately, racial trauma, most issues related to being Black were not really on the table, and I think this was a really cataclysmic moment where we were allowed to put it on the agenda and on the table, and that happened within the NHS. And I think what happened privately was that people responded, and I feel incredibly proud, to be honest, because especially the young people responded so proactively with being open and coming for support with these issues and naming it straight away. This is traumatized. This is really upsetting. This is really distressing. I want to talk about it. I think literally within days, I had clients speaking to me and wanting to process some of this stuff, and then going beyond that, wanting to process trauma, racial trauma throughout their lives, and also historic and generational trauma. And it's been really impressive, to be honest. I've been really proud of the response that I've seen and the people that have come to seek support from me.
Interesting. Well, before I say what I want to say about what you've just said, I'll let the others speak. Who wants to share their thoughts on this? I'll nominate you, Idriss.
So for my experience, when that happened, it was shocking. I've worked in anti-racism, and I was working in anti-racism at the time as well. So in terms of decolonizing the curriculum, sort of raising awareness about the current white supremacy society that we work under, and how racism impacts us on a day-to-day basis. So
Right.
that was kind of like the line of work that I was in at the time. And for that to happen on such a world stage and for it to generate the amount of outrage that it did was quite frustrating, because for someone who's been doing the work for a while, you would think, have you guys been blind all along? But at the same time, realizing that this new level of awareness is important, because a lot of more people are now acknowledging and naming, because as you said, Stephen, naming it for what it is. So we at the BiPP, we started doing a lot of thread and reports on racial trauma, and trying to find organizations that could that we could signpost so that people could go there to seek further, therapeutic work and stuff like that. So that became a moment of hyperactivity for anyone who's involved in the Black community's wellness, but also very draining and exhausting, that sense of being faced with questions and having to explain, or having to be having to sort of compose yourself and not break down as you're trying to articulate the complexity, the nuance, but also the scope of what just happened. So on my day-to-day as a professional, we had a lot more clients, because I was working with an anti-racism organization that was going into different schools and providing anti-racism training and decolonizing curriculum. So we had a lot more clients, because that became, quote unquote, a hot topic. So they wanted to demonstrate how anti-racist they were. Unfortunately, for some of them, we were very diligent in actually doing the work. So we had a lot of sign-ups, but then quite some resistance when we were delivering our material, because of how honest we were in tackling the problem, and not just patching the consequences or the symptoms, really looking at the root causes of the issue. So seeing that work, unravel that way was quite interesting. Obviously, we had a lot of people who were very receptive, due to obviously how we had designed our material as well. So that was a very encouraging thing. And as a person, I literally went to bed, a couple of days, extremely frustrated, close to tears, because I knew of how frequent these incidents happen. And it was only the unfortunate effect that he was captured. So that was sort of my experience.
Thank you so much. I think, did we hear your thoughts, Khanya, on this? Not yet, because I'm quite interested to see how it was seen from somewhere in the motherland, because usually when those cases come up, it's in the diaspora, and because it's in a particular country in the diaspora, then it gets like way beyond the borders of that country, and everybody takes it as their own, completely disregarding the fact that maybe in their own country the same thing happens every day, but they are not necessarily aware of it, and they don't necessarily, I don't know, share their thoughts for that. So how was it, digested, I would say, if it's, for lack of a better word? How is it?
Yeah. So what I noticed during that time is that a lot of people were obviously reposting and was sharing their condolences, and was speaking to, racial profiling, which was quite interesting, because then some people had the debate on social media about, well, why are you guys speaking about this thing that's happened abroad, whereas in South Africa we're experiencing this on a daily basis, like you're saying, and no one really speaks to it. And I remember with my friends and I, and even my sister, my younger sister, when we'd had this conversation, we were talking about how we related it back to ourselves as women, and being Black women in South Africa, and with the crime that is so rife in South Africa that, anything can happen. So for us, that's how we internalized it, where we were like, this is a male, and males tend to be perceived as safer in our communities and societies. Where does that put us as women and young Black women? in our
Yeah.
own country. And I remember I was reading an article about the pandemic, and they called it a pandemic on a pandemic because they were referring to this case as well, where they said there was racism and this COVID-19 that is
Right.
happening all together
Right.
at the
Right.
same time. Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, from my perspective, and like you guys have said, it's like how everyone reacted to it is very personal, and then what you were doing before George Floyd also influences a lot how you're going to interact and react to when stories like that unfortunately go viral. So from my perspective, what I remembered was that it went viral very quickly, and then people started this action of Blackout Tuesday, and
Yes.
it was just like it took over all social media. And I felt like, yes, we got people to look at this issue, but I wasn't too sure whether the way in which people eventually reacted to it, because I didn't have insight knowledge on the relevant industries that I would have wanted to have insight on, such as psychology, mental health, education, things like that, where I wanted to see things move in the aftermath of the death. I was really perplexed as to what was actually going to be the end result of this. Is it going to actually lead in policy change? Is it actually going to lead in, organizations who are active in that space to get more funding? Is it going to, create new, awareness for some specific subset of the population? How can we make sure that the people who are already aware of those issues can have more muscles to do what they need to do to, help us cope with these things when they come up? And I was really just watching that and thinking like, okay, let's give them 3 months. They're going to go back to partying if we are ever out of lockdown. And then those of us who actually really want to affect, real change in their daily lives, we're going to be able to connect with the people at that time and then build with them. Because you must have seen so many requests and queries coming your way that it probably wouldn't have been the right time for me to come to your side and say, hey, do you guys want to come on the talk show? Probably not. But I'm quite happy to be able to do it 2 years after, just so that we can have your thoughts on this. And I've very, very much appreciated hearing what you've said about people coming to you spontaneously and accepting to discuss that and engaging with a difficult conversation around Black trauma, around generational trauma that is passed down as well. That's a very, very interesting topic. And yes, I think I'm ready to move on to the next question. And
I just
maybe
have a question. Sorry, Marcy, for
that's all right.
Steven. So you were speaking about how people, obviously some of them voluntarily came to you to seek out for some help and services, which is quite interesting because I remember during the time of COVID-19, a lot of people were quite skeptical about the health and just receiving any form of healthcare at that point because of all of the, what's the word? Skepticism that came with COVID-19. And so my question is, were the people who were coming to you, people who, like what social class were they in? Or were they educated, or was it also persons from low socioeconomic environments who were able to say, look, this is how this has impacted me, and I really do want to speak about it?
All right. So firstly, I think just to emphasize, everything was remotely. There was no face-to-face interaction. That didn't happen until I think last year or something like that. But I was thinking about this earlier, to be honest, because I think there is an interaction there with social class. I think there is some kind of barrier there. People with lower socioeconomic status would find it really difficult to access like private therapy. So that's a barrier that I was coming up against, and I did things like working with clients on a nominal fee, some people paying like 30% of the fee and stuff like that. But also there was still the trend within the NHS, although it was less so. I could comment less on that kind of because I was moving away from the NHS into the private sphere. So my view is biased. I think it was on the agenda, no matter your social class, but I do think that people who are higher social economic status or in a higher level of class or education did make those moves quicker, but also had the ability to actually do it more. So they had that insight to recognize, oh, this is what stress looks like, this is what trauma looks like, and I can do something about it, rather than accept or not even recognize what was going on, because there was a certain level of education that and awareness that needed to happen in the first place, and that's
Right.
not necessarily in society as well. I don't know, does that kind of answer?
Yeah. The reason I'm asking is because we had the same struggle here where everyone is trying to seek out, or we advocating for people to seek out for, mental health services, but it's like there is no access for someone who may be living in a rural area in South Africa for them to have access to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, for example. So I just wanted to know how you guys were experiencing it on that side.
No, it's there's a real bias, I think, wherever you are in the world, because mental health and well-being isn't prioritized as much as physical well-being. There is just that there's less investment there, so actually we're not able to access the support as we might need to. So as a consequence, that means there's a demand, which means that people who don't necessarily have as much money or access to any form of power, if that's education or networks, they're not actually able to actually access the proper support. And it's a big problem, to be honest. But the good thing about being in the UK is that there are mental health services that people can access free of cost, basically. Whether they're the best kind of services and whether they actually meet the need is another question, but the services are there. Idriss, I wonder if you've got any comment on that.
That part about services being available for free is actually a very good observation, because yes, at the time I was using the service that wasn't from the NHS. I wasn't through the NHS. It was actually a private service, but they made a point to be quite accessible, financially, because at the time as well I was studying. So my finances were not allowing me to go and get a therapist for £120 an hour. So this service, it was quite affordable and it was online. So it made it very accessible. And I didn't stop sharing it amongst my friends and people that I knew were struggling with their mental health. But yeah, if I had recommended somebody to go to any NHS services, they would have been on a waiting list for months, and with the surge of demand, that would have probably been extended maybe to a year, to wait so that you can be seen by a professional. And I think that's one thing that the NHS really tried to address, that demand for mental health practitioners, which in as a knock-on effect, push more universities to rethink about the recruitment process so that they can train more professionals and look to train professionals from these ethnic minorities or racialized group, because with the the incident of George Floyd's death became the heightened awareness about race and racism and how it manifests itself in our day-to-day lives. So people became more vocal about requesting therapists or psychologists who looked like them. And so because the institution has been historically racist and not allowed many people from ethnic minorities to train as psychologists and psychiatrists, there was that gap between, okay, a lot of the people from ethnic minority are seeking therapy. They are not comfortable being that vulnerable with a white therapist or a white psychologist. They demand, ethnic minorities to be the one looking after them, because they understand the whole thing about unconscious bias and being, gaslighted, just because they may not be intentional about gaslighting you, but just because they don't have
They don't know.
a shared experience with you, some of the concept that you will bring up to them is just quite alien. So that sense of having to explain your experience was something that many people were so fed up with. And so, yeah, you as a BIPP, we advocate to increase access for Black and ethnic minority professionals within the world of psychiatry and psychology. So we
Right.
saw a lot more proactivity in universities and other institutions in recruiting Black professionals or professionals for ethnic minority. So that was, I guess, one of the knock-on effect. But overall, yeah, you could see that from the service delivery, there was a gap. There was a gap or the capacity in terms of capacity. Like there was not enough professionals to look after the people who needed to be looked after.
Right. I think before, because I know some of you will soon have to leave us, unfortunately, because you've got busy schedules. I do want to take, not that I don't like what you're saying, this is absolutely amazing, but I do want to take the conversation to another direction. And before I do so, I just want to highlight a few comments that were shared by those watching us, and particularly around George Floyd. The death of George Floyd shook up the whole Black world because we couldn't do anything else but swallow this information. That explains why this triggered so many involvements within the community. Well, good evening, Adrien. Thank you for this comment. And I can see that it's been basically echoed in the comment section as well. Just this question of not being able to escape and not being able to avoid that information, and the fact that it went viral so quickly has actually made it like have a very, very lasting impact, I think, on all of us in many, many different ways. Just to, from simply kind of raising awareness about these things to actually helping people just engage actively, whether personally or supporting organizations, and even outside of the community, I would say, in terms of unlocking funding. I have definitely seen a lot of initiatives that have come out after that of people wanted to support Black organizations and were willing to give money, because we have to talk about money. It's not just support like I'm going to shout you out on social media, and because all of that was absolutely ridiculous as well from my perspective. We had like lots of big corporates saying, I stand with the blah, blah, blah. I was like, no, just give people money. So they are able to actually engage with the affected communities and help them on a day-to-day basis. And
just on
so,
that point as well. So this,
yes, sure.
giving money is definitely crucial, but also giving resources. I think as well sometimes some organizations may be given financial resources, but they probably won't be given other like logistical resources to really maximize whatever is being given to them. Because yes,
Right.
if you are a small organization of a team of 3 that have been doing grassroots work and you get given £10,000, you probably don't necessarily know how you can maximize those £10,000. How do you scale up? And so a lot of work also is needed where you don't just hand out cash to a lot of people, you also facilitate how they can maximize their work that they're doing. Yeah.
Right. I agree with that. And without revealing too much about what I do on a daily basis, it's not just about getting the bags, it's also about knowing how to maximize their use in whatever activity you're trying to push. So it's good to have the bags, but it's best to have a strategy to actually implement whatever goal you're trying to achieve. I want to move on to the next topic as we're getting close to the hour of discussion. And it's probably going to be related as well to one of the questions that I have seen in the chat. Unfortunately, anything that touches on mental health in the Black community is surrounded by a big taboo. And usually that big taboo is also connected to witchcraft, unfortunately. And in my research, I have come across the very, very sad story of Victoria. So if you've never seen the picture of this little girl, her story is absolutely heartbreaking. And I wanted to talk about her in this discussion because last month we had like Mental Health Day celebrated in the world. And then I think a couple of days ago or so, we've had like a stress awareness day in the UK. But also earlier this month, it would have been Victoria's 31st anniversary. But unfortunately, her life was taken back in 2000. And she died because, unfortunately, some people that she was living with were accusing her of witchcraft. And they've basically molested her so much that it led to her death. So this little girl has gone through a lot over month and month and month and month. And even if she was regularly seen by different social care workers and care institutions, unfortunately, the abuse that she was going through was not picked up early enough to save her life. And ever since that case, unfortunately, got known in the public, it triggered a lot of changes for children's law policy framework in the UK, as well as how associations, charities, etc. are organized, and also how like the procedures to look after people that are reported being subject to abuse, etc. are looked after. So I won't go into too many details about her particular story, but I wanted to mention that stigma around witchcraft. And there is another, unfortunately, case as well of a young man who's unfortunately gone through the same very, very sad, I would say, destiny as Victoria. His name is Kristy. So I'll just quickly show you his picture because I didn't want to have pictures with him and the people who murdered him. And I wasn't lucky enough to find pictures. That one is not, it doesn't have that much life, but that's him. And again, if you want to know about his story, unfortunately, he was sent over Christmas to his sister and her partner's house. And unfortunately, after a few days, they've accused him as well as his other siblings of witchcraft. And after that, they've molested them over days and days and days. And at the end of that, he died of all of his wounds, etc. So unfortunately, that case is what also shook the UK. I think it was in 2010, that one. So we've got one case in 2000, one case in 2010. And those two stories have terribly, terribly kind of like highlighted how when a belief is kind of out of control, how it can also lead, unfortunately, to death. So I want to ask my experts tonight, why is it so in the Black community that we've got such a strong connection between mental health issues and witchcraft? And what can we do to kind of like, change mentalities or make them evolve if we can?
I'm just going to start because I'm definitely running out of time. But I think when you look at, civilization around the world, many groups have developed superstition based on their misunderstanding of nature. Anything that has not been fully clear has been shrouded with mystery and superstitions and allegations about the supernatural and everything like that. So I think one of the main reasons why our understanding of our confusion between mental health and witchcraft is so strong is because we have, for a couple of decades now, been misinformed or been uninformed about the reality of mental health just because of that lack of information accessible. Many centuries of us been discouraged to pursue education, and a lot of us have been kept in the dark about really understanding the mechanics of the brain and the mind and how that can manifest on a day-to-day basis. So you find yourself having a lot of population who will grab at any superstitions or any allegations of wrongdoing because they don't know any better. And this goes the same for, traditional practices who for many centuries have been sort of pushed into the fringe of society, have been, made to be outlaws or made to be demonized because of the propagation of Christianity and Islam on the continent. And so many traditions and rituals that were common practices and that were part of our well-being, our DNA, our just general culture have now been demonized, whether it was through media or through, the church or the mosque or anything like that, to be relegated to being witchcraft. So any association with that will generate that sense of, oh, this is horrible, this has to be stamped out. which will create those very strong reaction. So I think, yeah, definitely a combination between the demonizations of traditions and the misinformations about mental health has contributed to these incidents happening.
Thank you so much. Anyone else wants to add in on this connection between witchcraft and mental health?
Yeah, so what I've seen in our South African communities is it's due to the lack of education. And we found that even if it's a physical, let's say, for example, a child who may be presenting with cerebral palsy, because the parents don't understand the condition, they tend to assume that it's witchcraft. And as a result of that, you find that the children or that individual is usually left in a dark room inside the house. They never go outside. They never get to engage in play. And it goes back to cultural beliefs as well, that a lot of the time when things do go wrong with you, within our Black society in South Africa, people tend to believe that it's witchcraft. And then as a result of that, you'll be sent to someone for traditional medicines to see if that can help. And I've also found that that happens even in the psychiatric hospitals or even in a physical hospital, where the families will bring in a traditional healer from outside to try and, come heal you whilst you're in making use of the westernized medicine. And I think that's also because of that, we're finding that it's difficult even for the patients who may be diagnosed with either bipolar or depression to really accept their diagnosis, because there's so much confusion of, have I really been, is it witchcraft or is it just, that I'm living with depression now?
Yeah. Interesting. Steve, what are your thoughts on this?
If I'm honest, I don't have loads of thoughts. I think from the information that I do know is that a lot of witchcraft beliefs are often held quite deeply in terms of culture, and it's at odds with basically a Western understanding of mental health. Because I think ultimately the problem is that understanding mental health difficulties and mental health difficulties and mental health literacy, we might say, is not widespread enough. It's not known within Black and African communities to be relevant to us, for us to actually start applying the ideas to ourselves. So we use a different knowledge system to explain in the world, basically.
Right.
So I think the more people can actually understand mental health and how mental health is good and not so good mental health, and mental health illnesses are real and apply to all human beings and can explain a lot of things, the more that we can actually increase that awareness, the more that we actually have a strong system of some explanation, as opposed to the witchcraft beliefs, which can have, or we can see a lot of quite detrimental effects, really. That's all I can really say about it, to be honest. I think
that's already a lot. He said that's all you can say, as if it was, not a great analysis of some, unfortunately, of the problems that we face that are an additional layer of complexity because you are Black. I think this is already a lot, and like some of the comments are echoing that belief in witchcraft to explain all our problems is due to a lack of education and information. And as Idriss has said, because we've been kept in the dark, especially on the motherland. Yes, I think I would also agree with that comment, and thank you for raising that, because I think there is a lot of education that has to be done, but just even removing the word education, just sometimes just having the conversation in a space that is not to attack anyone, not to attack your belief, because some people sometimes think that we're challenging their religious beliefs if we want to talk about mental health like directly and address what it means. They think that we're going to attack how they see their religious, doctrine, etc. And no, it's not just about that. I think we have to be mature enough to be able to have those conversations without stigmatizing anyone, and just to try and find solution. And there's actually one question from Tumelo, hey, who's asking, is there even enough mental health awareness in our community, especially since COVID? Have you guys seen an increase in Black people seeking mental health services? And if I can add to that question before you guys answer, I'm like, yes, how can we, practically engage with those questions, even when we are not professionals? Like, if we want to help, like, what kind of resources would you recommend going into to just, learn ourselves so that we can also be, smaller, vessels for what you do, what your expertise is, and that we can just channel people progressively towards the professionals to talk about these things?
Thank you, Dumela, for the question. I think for me, I struggle with the word awareness because I feel like sometimes that's where it ends. We'll have a hashtag for a week. After that, people have moved on. And for me, it's a question of how else, yes, we're creating awareness, but how else can we ensure that with this awareness, there's action that's going to take place? Like, for example, what you were saying earlier, Marcy, that will the policies change, or what will happen as a result of this creating of awareness for mental health? And for me, I think even to answer that question, it goes back to engaging in conversations with people about mental health. Because even with patients that I see in the hospital, they'll also be like, I didn't tell my family where I am. I don't want them to think that I'm crazy.
Yes.
And I don't want to be perceived, if I'm having a terrible day at home, that now they're going to say, oh, this,
Exactly.
they started again with their mood swings and whatever. So for me, it goes back to having those conversations with your friends, with colleagues, and then also in terms of the question that Dumela is asking about, have we seen an increase in the number of people seeking mental health? For me personally, I would say yes, but then it goes back to what I had stated earlier about what I've seen in terms of it's the companies that are pushing for people to go back and seek the mental health services because they're seeing that some of their employees are really struggling to integrate back into the workspace after COVID-19.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Steve, we're listening to you. What have you seen? How can we raise awareness?
I think it's the same, to be honest. I think there is awareness. Is there enough mental health awareness? No. What is enough? I think more is enough. More. The more we have, the better. But I don't think there is enough. But there is some. I think I've observed the trend. I think there is actually an increase in mental health awareness. So that's something since COVID. That's what I've observed. But I've probably got quite a biased perspective in terms of where I sit in the world in London.
Right.
And being in private therapy and people that I know. But I think there has been some changes, I think, at least in the UK. Is it enough? No. What can we do, though? I think connecting with each other is really important. I think putting stuff on, and I say this a lot, I think just putting stuff on the table, putting it on the agenda. In London, for example, there have been plays and discussions about mental health and Black men's mental health and suicide. I think people like Stormzy have been speaking about it, and more musicians and creatives. So things like that, just putting it on the agenda, putting it on the table, this is something that isn't a secret. That's what I think we need to do more of, basically.
I like this very last sentence that you said, because I think it will probably help us go through the second question that Tomatoes raised. And it's a question about how we can encourage people to go see psychologists without fearing ending up in a psych hospital. So how do we tackle that fear, that sentiment of maybe mistrust or distrust? I'm not sure what would be the correct word, but there's definitely a question of trust and fear when it comes to the institutions that look after those specific issues.
And I think that's not without good reason. I don't know off the top of my head the actual stats, but they have consistently for decades, for my lifetime, been not good. That they've been really biased against Black people presenting to any kind of psychological or psychiatric services. What can we do is I think speaking to people is the first is the most important thing. So actually, we probably know somebody who's had access to a counsellor. So actually, the more that we speak to each other, the more it's normalised. That's the first thing we can speak to each other about, seeking support. And in the biggest point, to be honest, with psychiatric hospitals is that the conditions at which that happens, somebody needs to be in a psychiatric hospital and stay there ultimately against their will, is ultimately if two or three people deem you to be at risk of harm to your own life or endangering somebody else's life, and these do need to be professionals or somebody within your family. So actually, if you're struggling with your well-being and it's not about maybe you wanting to actively hurt yourself or somebody else, then the chances of that are so slim. We need to be trying to put a difference between this kind of support that is in place for the more extreme, let's say, cases and what I might call kind of common day distress.
Thank you so much for that. What can you add to this, Khanya?
I think one of the misconceptions about psychiatric hospitals is that you go there and you get tied up and you're strapped up. And that's why a lot of people don't want to go to psychiatric hospitals. So I agree with Steven about having those conversations and normalizing discussing mental health. And I think if you're a person who knows and understands mental health, and maybe you've even went out and had sessions with a psychologist, explain that to the next person that, look, this is how I've accepted it, or this is how I've perceived it and how it's working for me or not working for me. Because I also know with regards to people seeking out help, they want to speak to someone who, I think it's what Idriss was saying earlier, that someone who looks like them, who understands Black culture and how our families and our parents usually perceive mental health. And so a lot of people tend to think that by going to one psychologist, that's it. But sometimes you need to go to multiple psychologists to find your fit and find the person that's actually going to work for you and the therapeutic style that you would like.
Yes, I think I like that. And that also goes with some of the comments that I'm seeing in the section right now. I think I have had myself to engage with therapy, and I can tell you that was not easy, because not only you have a lot of like preconceived ideas of that before you actually have to engage with that, but then on top of that, you have to trust whoever you do it with, and finding that right fit, finding that right person is not an easy job. So that's why everything you guys said earlier about, just having that conversation, even just having that conversation with the people you know is difficult, but let alone going to a professional that doesn't understand the basics of your culture. You're not there to train them about Blackness.
Yes.
You're there to be helped. You're there to seek their help. So if the start of the conversation is, what does, plantain means, that's not good. I've said something silly, just, so that, I can get you guys to laugh, but that's my whole point. And I'm seeing great comments in the section. I'll just highlight a few about spaces where we can have those discussions. And one of the spaces that was mentioned, I can't highlight all of them, but I'll highlight the comments around the barbershop, because we're talking about what are those spaces where we can actually open up and share, our sentiments, our emotions. Where can we go? And Adrian just said earlier that because he doesn't have any trust in those institutions that are supposed to help people with those issues, he would rather have, opened up conversation at the barbershop, even if they are not qualified psychologists, therapists, etc. He would rather have a conversation in that space that he identifies as safe for him, rather than going in a formal institution that is supposedly qualified to engage in those conversations. And Tumelo, I think, has also echoed that sentiment, because he said that he has seen some, barbers and groomers being trained to actually be able to engage in those conversations. So what do you guys see in terms of like those alternative spaces where we can have those conversations, like barbershop, hair salon, nail bar? What else can we think about?
It's
Afternoon
all good.
teas, brunch for the ladies.
I think it's nice to have those conversations in environments like that, so it doesn't feel too rigid and that I need to have the perfect answer. But if you getting your hair done and you guys are laughing and talking about your stresses and what you've been going through, it makes it easier for the next person to also open up and say, look, I'm also struggling with this, or I did seek out for this. And people do tend to get help from that by communicating or speaking in their leisure environments, be it that they're at a party or having lunch or at the barber, for example.
Interesting. Is that also where you would go
No.
to share some thoughts?
Sorry.
We'll let you finish. You wouldn't go there, Khanya? You're done. Okay.
Yes,
So-
I think I only had one question, and that it was for Steven, which is not related to this right now, but maybe you can answer it. About mental health in Black men, because I've been finding it very difficult to get Black men to really engage in my groups and sessions and really speak out about what they may be experiencing. And especially if I've just got a group of maybe 10 Black men and everyone is just like on guard about whatever it is that they're going through, as much as they're here to get help, but they don't actually make use of the services as much if they're in a group setting.
I think, what are my thoughts on that? Is that's basically the question, yeah?
Yes.
I think my thoughts are that it's difficult that there's an extra layer of stigma. I think men, and particularly Black men, are battling the ancient battles of wanting to always be strong and not portray weakness. And I think it's not just not just being them. So I think opening up, giving examples can be, just getting the ball rolling can be really helpful, because then you start to normalize something, and it's easy to say me too rather than, oh, this is what's going on with me, which is why the barbershop idea is always really great, because, oh, this thing happened at home, and then somebody else goes, oh, yeah, it's the same, that's the same thing. So I think trying to break down those barriers, but also I think in the UK what we see, not necessarily with Black men, but with men, is almost putting it on the side. So actually maybe things like men who like using their hands and fixing things, we're going to be doing that, and actually when you're fixing things and you're going to be talking about stuff just by the way, and it's like you got distracted and you started talking about your feelings, and now you're there.
So we need to be more creative to engage men, get them to do things, and then make them talk. I was thinking food could be a good option as well. Have a nice meal, just gather around. If you want your plate, tell me something. Okay, now let's be more serious. I've seen a very interesting, I think, follow-up question to what you guys are discussing, maybe around representation. Let me grab it. So yes, do you think representation matters when it comes to seeking mental health services, especially for Black people? I think this is kind of a good follow-up to what you guys are just saying, in terms of, first of all, the individual who is seeking help, where do they feel more comfortable talking and opening up about those issues? That's very important. And then who do they open up to?
I think it's
So
100% important. Representation really does matter. And South Africa has like, I think 11 or 12 official languages. And beginning of this year, I was working in a setting where I think there were at least 6 different languages. And if I went up to the group and I just started speaking English, I'd automatically see people almost signing out of the discussion. But when I engage with them in their home languages, and they could relate better with me, and not being too rigid and formal about how I'm presenting what depression is or how to better manage your stress. So I really do think representation does matter, because automatically that person also feels comfortable in letting their guard down, because they feel like, oh, here's someone that I can also relate to. And it's not just a therapist who's got everything going well for them, but, it's another human being that I can share with.
exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
I mean, I agree 100%. Representation definitely matters. It matters so much. I think it's a good thing to be able to choose. If you can't choose who you open up to, that can be a really big problem and a barrier. And I think I'm not sure if it's relevant, but I think if you are seeking help, it is worth trying to actually try and find that good match with people. And I think that's something that I offer, and I don't think I'm the only person that offers that. Actually, just let's have a chat. Let's see how we get on. Let's see what the vibe is. Let's see how we are together, and then go forward. And I think if you do get a choice, then do that, because that makes everything better. If I like you, you like me, we're getting on, then more than half the battle is kind of done, really. So representation matters, because it's not fair if some people don't get to feel comfortable when trying to seek support about really difficult things.
I agree. I think I am just scrolling down quickly through the comments, and I am seeing lots of comments about men. Okay, the male energy in the comment section needs to, you need to relax. Otherwise, I'm not reading your comments. No, I'm joking. But no, I think one of the points that I'm seeing from those comments, and especially around who is best placed to basically assist one specific individual, and the power and the importance of representation, is reflected in those comments. So about the barbershop place, I think Tumelo has shared another comment where he says that they've noticed that men prefer going to their barber over a qualified mental health worker, and he thinks it's actually amazing. And I agree with that as well, because I think that notion of being comfortable should probably be, in my view, top of the list when it comes to engaging with those very hard issues, because there's no point just going to seeing like a specialist just to tick the box, like I've seen you have answered your questions, but you don't know if I was actually really being honest, or if I was just ticking the boxes in my brain, making you satisfied as a therapist so that you can say, yeah, I've seen patient X, blah blah blah, or whether it actually really helped me. So I agree with that. That's amazing. And we black men are very, well, we've seen that was fine, thanks. Unlikely to open up in front of women. It would make us look weak. We open up in front of other men, but there needs to be trust. I'm not saying it's right, but it is a fact. Okay, so on that specific comment, that's why I created Lisanga Vibes, because Lisanga Vibes is, first of all, for women. And if you guys don't know what Lisanga Vibes is about, it started nearly 3 years ago now in my flat, because I wanted to have a space for black women where they could just discuss about anything. And it didn't have to be about proving points. It didn't have to be about expressing your trauma. It was really supposed to be very organic, and just to be like kind of like a meetup regularly where we're just in a good space. Sometimes we play games, sometimes we talk about things, sometimes we read stuff, sometimes we have cultural presentation, but it was supposed to be a mix of activities that are just a reason for us to come together to discuss. And whatever we discussed didn't have to necessarily be traumatic. If it so happens that, you know, within the course of dinner or whatever, one of us feels like she wants to share about something that happened at work or in life or in her family, then okay, we're happy to engage with them. But if it doesn't come up, it doesn't come up. So I would agree that considering being in non-mixed spaces, gender, color, etc., should definitely not be disregarded when it comes to that. I would definitely agree with that. I'm not sure what the experts would say, but from my perspective, I feel like when I have to defend why Lisanga Vibes was created for Black women, this is exactly the point. Because there are some spaces where we don't necessarily want to have everyone's opinions, and we don't necessarily want to have everybody's energy when we talk about certain things. We have the right to not be right, to say things, you know, with some passion, to question things as well. And it needs to be in a space where, you know, you will not be looked down upon or things like that. So I like those comments. And I've seen a question for you. Are professional therapists taught about social systems such as the patriarchy and racism, or is it possible to practice with no knowledge of these?
Oh, that's a very good question.
Thank you, Shida.
So with us, we are taught about racism and how it's influenced our communities, and how then we as occupational therapists can work with these communities who have been impacted by apartheid and what has happened within our South African context, because that influences the therapeutic program, and that influences
Right.
either the patient's perception of health systems, especially the westernized medical implementation. And I think it goes back to what I was trying to say about some of the work that we do, right? So we're using literature that was written, and some of the literature isn't necessarily for Black people, and sometimes it's difficult to then try and incorporate that into a therapeutic program that is fitting for Black people specifically. So yeah, we do get taught about patriarchy and racism and how it impacts and influences the therapeutic process.
David?
There's no diplomatic way of saying this.
Yeah.
It's. I think that Shida was onto something, because sadly, I think it is possible to be able to practice without a very good understanding of social systems and power inequality within society. I do think it's less likely to happen if you're working with a therapist who's Black, because of their root there. I think some training courses and some training routes into professional therapy, I would say, don't put necessarily a lot of emphasis in understanding, to my point of view, like, well enough the impact of society and structure. I think a lot of the emphasis is a lot more on internal processes or processes between one person and another person, and not necessarily on a slightly macro level. That said, I think all therapists are taught the importance about trying to understand people and leading, or actually letting a client lead their story and listening and sitting back and trying to minimize any power differentials that may be at play, and to think more about family and culture. Racism less so, but trying to actually make a note of it and to take a lead from your client on that. So I think a deep respect for inequality in society is always taught. Whether there's enough, or whether whether we could do more, is another question.
Interesting. I think there was thank you for that. let me just see. I think I've seen a follow-up comment. Thank you for this question. And as a follow-up response, I think that's partly why we seek Black therapists who are more likely to understand our lived experience. Yes, definitely agree with this comment. And thank you for this question. I think I want to share another story from my research with you. So, where are you guys? I lost you guys. There we go. So, doing my research as well, I particularly looked at the UK, and I came across also the story of this young man. And if you've never seen his picture before, because you're not from the UK, or maybe in the UK, but you've not heard his story, his name is Olaseni Lewis. And unfortunately, he died in a mental health institution. So I came across his story because, like I told you earlier this year, I've had myself to look for a therapist. And as I was going through that, I also started looking into the history of mental health institutions in the UK. And I came across his story. And then I was also lucky enough to meet his mother. So I've been lucky enough to meet Auntie Aji. And I said to her that I would definitely share the story of her son, because that moved me. And also because in the same way that Victoria's stories has led to massive changes in the framework in the UK, his story as well has led to massive changes in the specific space of mental health as well. So his background story was that he already had kind of like mental disorders. He knew it, his family knew it as well. And when it really went to a point where they didn't know what to do, he went to actually get checked in a mental health institution. So he, like I would say, of his own will, went to an institution to actually seek help. And in the process of doing that, that's when things went wrong, because excessive force was used to try and restrain him. And unfortunately, that led to his death. So without giving you too many graphic details, 11 people were involved to restrain him. He had 2 pairs of handcuffs and 2 pairs of leg braces on him. And after that, of course, when, things went wrong, they didn't even have the courtesy of calling his family instantly to say what happened. So the family found out through, I think one of his friends had called the institution just to find out how he was doing, and was told like there was an incident. And then when the friend said, "What do you mean there was an incident? Did you even call his mother?" And they were like, "Oh no, we didn't have her number, sorry." And it was just like a series of issues in the procedure of what happened to him, but also what happened after it happened to him, like in terms of notifying the right people and making sure that he got immediately assistance to save his life. So many things went wrong, leading to his death. And after that, his family started basically fighting for his legacy to have that change so that other families could not go through the same pain. And eventually, it's only, I think, after like a 7-year period that they eventually got to have a proper inquest, an inquiry into his case, and clear details about what happened, and people actually recognizing where they failed. And that has led eventually to a law as well to improve those mismanagement issues, even if I don't like to say those words. But yeah, that was his story, and I wanted to share that with you. And in 2020, there was actually outside of the mental health hospital he was looked after in. I have problems saying looked after because eventually he died, and that shouldn't have happened. But where he was, where he spent his last days of living, they had like engaged a campaign around the questions of assessing mental health in those places, and like the different kind of questions. So they had commissioned this work, and there were like 8 mirrors that were having in like capital letters some of the questions that people who are admitted in mental health institutions are most likely to hear from the professionals. And someone came and put on those 8 mirrors, R.I.P. Sheni. So it was clearly someone who knew what had happened then, back in 2010, and also who was aware that, the story kind of like went, unknown or very, almost kept, unfortunately, in the dark for some of us till this day. And that was what they had done. So that just shows how sometimes even graffiti can have a powerful message. And unfortunately, everything that I've seen in the comment section around not trusting mental health institutions, well, you know, when you hear of stories like that, it's quite painful. And I don't know how we can restore that trust. Can we restore that trust even? I don't know.
I think it's hard. Can you restore that trust? I think we need to have hope. I think it's really hard, and I think, and I'm trying not to answer this like a politician or anything. I want to be completely honest. Because it's a tragedy. This is an absolute tragedy. Okay. And at the same time, just as you were looking, I was trying to do research really quickly and looking at the details of what was going on. So I don't know very much. But from what I can gather, this is looking at an absolute tragedy. But I think the problem of what was actually going on in terms of diagnosis is quite important. I think, again, it's kind of coming back to this idea of if there's a legal right, or you can't hurt somebody, you can't just restrain somebody in the street. But if there's very exceptions where these kind of things happen, and I think it's like in these examples where people are clearly wrongly in this situation, and many situations where somebody, or in this case, many people have assessed somebody to be a danger or a threat to themselves or somebody else. And I think basically the problem is, I think there is a difference between having a diagnosis where you may need to have a stay in hospital and not having a specific diagnosis and all the stigma that comes around having these diagnoses. Because I think if you don't have a specific diagnosis and you're not known to hospitals, you're less likely to be in these situations. It doesn't happen, basically. But I think we're talking about two different things. It's people who have specific diagnoses of what we might call severe or serious mental illness. There's a whole set of problems that are, I think, separate problems to other people who have potentially different diagnoses. And it's just hard to say out loud, but I think that ultimately that's it. And I think it doesn't look in any way, it doesn't look good. How can you rebuild trust when you see something that traumatic? The only answer I have is to try and understand what's going on. And I'm still doing that. I don't know much about this, so I'm making an assumption that this person.
Yeah, I can definitely. I think I'll try and find a link to the video that I watched about the graffiti. It's because it's a 20 minutes documentary where you actually see some of his relatives talking about that, as well as Marcy Riggs, the sister of Sean Rigg as well. She's also in that documentary, and it just covers how basically that story resurfaced because of that graffiti, because the decision I think was taken back into 2017 or something like that. So there had been like kind of a gap of years when, you know, the story actually really came back up again. And yeah, that was and his mom is actually lovely as well. And we don't even talk about like how the families are affected, because we've very much, you know, focused all of our discussion around people needing help and people assisting them, but we've not even extended that discussion to the people around them. And I think that's also a very, very important thing to consider when we talk about these things. Khanya, what are your thoughts on, you know, when unfortunately things go wrong in institutions?
Sure. It's very unfortunate, and I don't really have much to add on to that, because I think in South Africa, again, I'm going to say that we really struggle with those unfortunate things that do happen in hospitals. And a lot of the time it's due to the lack of access to proper health care, or we don't have enough health professionals in a specific hospital to really be able to care for the next person, either in the emergency room. And I really don't know how we can work towards society trusting that particular hospital again, especially when it comes to things like mental health, because there's already that stigma around it,
Right.
and people not wanting to go into psychiatric institutions. So I think it's a very difficult conversation to have with regards to that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's why it's such a difficult conversation to have, that I didn't have any other choice but to invite you guys to attempt to touch on that in the very, very diverse range of topics that I like to discuss about. But I think it's important, and unfortunately, stories like that shouldn't happen. And I also wanted to have that conversation because even if we feel like there's a lot of content around black mental health and black trauma online, etc., I feel like sometimes when there's too much, it's not really that effective anymore because people feel like they've got enough time to look at that. They've got enough time to come back to it. So it doesn't have to happen right now and it can wait. So yeah, I think these conversations definitely have to keep going. And whether it's just, sharing the right details to the right people about what's happening, who does what, and then letting them make their own connections their way. I think that's more than enough. And when we can do it, we should definitely use our platforms to do so. And we can see that it touches anyone. Like we're not going to talk about a particular celebrity that has been highlighted in the news recently, but even even with that much money, it doesn't protect you from these things. And even earlier this year when we've had a story about a slap, well, those two people involved have had their own issues, I think, and we unfortunately were just witness to some issues unfortunately being settled in front of millions of people. So yeah, I think unless you guys have other questions or comments in the comments section, I'm going to let my speakers share their final thoughts on this very, very, very interesting conversation. And yeah, if you don't have questions, which you don't seem to have, so I'll ask you, what tips can you give us to improve our mental health, or how we manage it, or how we maintain it, or how we improve it? What tips can you give us? I'll nominate Khanya because you've got a bigger smile.
Darn. I think the first one is, and unfortunately enough, earlier this morning, I was part of a journal club where they were speaking about being more loving towards self. So the same advice that you would give to your friend about taking care of themselves and taking it easy. I always advocate that that people need to have time alone and have self-care days, be it self-care Saturday, self-care Sunday, where they spend time with themselves and really try and figure out who they are and where they're going. I like to say that engaging in journaling, be it gratitude journaling, also helps improve one's mood, and even engaging in things like physical exercise. Those also help really. It does help channel your emotions as well, be it if you're going through a very rough patch. And also I like to say, engage in leisure exploration. So a lot of the time when you are feeling very sad and maybe you present with depression, sometimes you lose interest in the things that you do enjoy. Especially now that it's end of the year, people are tired, people just want to be on holiday. So sometimes you lose that interest in the things that you did enjoy. So it's about exploring now what are the other things that you do enjoy and trying to engage in those. And I also just want to say to those people who are in South Africa, SADAG is an organization that really helps with people living with any mental health condition. They have groups on there that you can attend, and even individual sessions if you do need that assistance. Yeah.
Okay, you said SADAG in South Africa.
Yes.
The South African Depression and Anxiety Group?
Yes.
Okay, I'll find the link and send it right now in the chat. Well, thank you so much for that. Up to you.
I can add to that. I think, Khanya, what you said is great across the board in terms of being kind to ourselves. The world can do with a lot more of that now. So actually speaking to ourselves as we might do to a friend, or as a friend might speak to us, that is generally going to be fantastic across the board. But also thinking about how we spend our time, I think, is really important. So trying to actually have a balance between things that you need to do in the day-to-day level, but also things that are rewarding or valuable to you. Making sure that you're doing things that are enjoyable or giving you a sense of achievement or some other value to your life. So actually, every now and then, just having a step back and looking at your life and seeing what it's all about. How actually are you spending your time? Where are you putting your energies, and actually trying to connect with what's important to you. And that may not be the same as the person next to you, but connecting more with what's important to you, your own values, doing things that you enjoy, and connecting with people, and nature, getting outside. I think those are the best general kind of self-tips. But also speak to people. Don't be afraid to speak, and actually don't be afraid to seek help ever. You're the strong person if you actually do seek support. That's the important thing.
Interesting.
100%. And I think even engaging in quality sleep, I think it's very important. But then quality sleep is not sleeping for more than 12
10
hours
days.
and you don't want to get out of bed. So yeah, that's also quite important to do, and to also just sometimes when you are feeling tired and you don't want to do anything, open the curtains. That also helps. And make it.
I like that one. Open the curtains. I'm actually typing them, So even if you say crazy things, I'm actually typing them in the chat as you give them. So, if you tell me like make a pie, cook, whatever, I'm typing cook, make a pie.
Yeah, and sometimes people think that you always need to be doing something, and I'm a victim to that. I always want to be busy, and sometimes all you need to do is just to relax and just be by yourself and not really do anything. And I think engaging in rest is also very important, where you're just lounging on the couch and maybe reading a book or just lounging on the couch.
I like that. Just relax, stay on the couch. And stay on the couch. Okay, I think I've typed nearly all of them. Nearly. I'm going to read them again just so we can see we've got all of them. So I wrote down give yourself self-care days and love yourself. That's what I wrote. The first note was self-care days and loving yourself. Then journal your thoughts and emotions. 3, exercise. 4, explore more the things that you enjoy doing. For South Africans watching us, you can consult the page of SADAG should you need help. 5, have a balance in your life. That was missing, but that's what I mean. 6, reward yourself and give value to what you do to your time. 7, connect with people. 8, connect with nature. 9, get some quality sleep. 10, open the curtains, even if you're not doing anything. 11, don't overwork. Just relax and stay on the couch if you can. So that was kind of like our tips. Sorry for my typos as I was typing them, but that was some of the great tips that we've had from our experts this evening. Thank you so much to everyone in the comments section. Do you have any closing remarks as I keep popping up the great tips that you gave us already?
I think from my side, I just want to say thank you for inviting me to be on the show. It was really exciting to really hear your guys' perspective on mental health within your personal communities. I really enjoyed it. And I like to use the analogy in my closing that when you're on a plane, they tend to say if there's an emergency, you first put your mask on and then you put the mask on someone else. So the same way, same thing has to apply in your personal life. You are not being selfish if you're taking care of yourself and you're having those self-care days. You can't pour from an empty cup. So as much as you're saying, I may be sacrificing for my family, but your family can't get anything from you if you are lying in hospital. Thank you very much.
Thank you for disclosing that. That was amazing. Well, the only man that stayed with us, the other one has kind of given up already.
That's fine. I'm the last one. That's fantastic. Great. Thank you, Marcy, for inviting me. It's been a while. It's great to see your face again, and it's great to speak about mental wellness and actually having a positive spin and engaging with the community more and more. And I think the more we can connect, the better it's going to be for everybody. The more we speak, the less stigmatizing it gets for everybody. So actually, the more we can connect with each other and share and be open, the better it's going to be. So I think if we can just approach each other with an open heart and be honest and fear less, we're heading in the right direction. So I think just thank you so much for that. And if we can just love each other, that's fantastic.
That was a wonderful, closing note. I like that. I think I like both the energies of like, I'm keeping the analogy of the plane and I'm keeping the just love one another and, help one another when you can as well. I absolutely love that. I also want to thank you 2 and 3, because even if Idriss left already, he's given us great gems before going. I really wanted to thank you all for accepting to come on the show, because this is a small YouTube channel, so it's not necessarily that easy to get people to actually come on board and share about their expertise. So we appreciate that. I think I've appreciated that. The people in the comments section have definitely engaged with you guys as well, and shared, I think that's probably one of the discussions where I've had the largest comment sections to read each time, because usually it's hi, hey, or like people smiling, but today was, no emojis, like very, very serious conversation, So I'm quite happy with what came out, and I'm very, very happy. I can see one last remark: nobody judges more than you. Your stress and anxiety comes from the fact that we judge ourselves too much. Relax. Okay, yeah. So that just reemphasizes the tip number 11. That was don't overwork, just relax and stay on the couch when you can. And yeah, thank you so much for having been such a great audience. Thank you so much for having been such great guests. I will definitely share all your socials, etc. Through our social media. They will also be on our website. If you guys don't know what Lisanga Vibes is, etc., I really, 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 really encourage you to go on our website and just, explore what we do. If you're not yet subscribed to this channel, please like this video, subscribe to the channel. Just be more curious, And also, I probably didn't say it before, but I am first and foremost a blogger. So before even doing Lisanga Vibes, etc., what I like doing is blogging about cultural stuff. And I occasionally write stuff on my blog. So it can be 2 lines. It can be 5 paragraphs. It depends. But again, if you ever, want to spend 5 minutes on the website, read stuff, anything, click on anything, then I encourage you very much to do so as well. And yeah, we are a big family. Thank you so much, guys, for having been with us tonight. I am not going to keep you that long on stage. I'll put you in the backstage, but just wait for me before I close out. So I'm going to let you guys go and meet you in the backstage in a minute. And for everyone still online, thank you so much again for having stayed that long with us online, watching and listening to this very, very passionate conversation about mental health, mental wellness. Share the video with anyone who you think would benefit from the advice given and the thoughts and reflection on the last 2 years. And as far as I am concerned, you can find us on social media. You can find us, you can hear from us in the newsletter as well. And like I said, next month we are partying in Paris, 3rd anniversary of Lisanga Vibes. So, you know, if you can, come and join us, have fun. If not, then maybe next year we get to meet in small events where we can actually engage and take this discussion further. Khanya, I hope I can come at some point to South Africa, party there, you know, but that's maybe for the years to come. And yeah, I'm not going to take that much of your time. Thank you so much for having stayed that long with us. And I'm going to let you enjoy our closing music video.